Good morning and welcome to the next episode of our podcast, where we drink tea and navigate the balance between school and personal life. I'm Sophia Safe.
And I'm Sophia Curry.
And this is Sip and Spill.
Welcome back to the Tea Journal.
The topic we'll be touching on today is why mental health support matters starting young, why so many families treat therapy like a taboo, and what you can actually do for yourself when professional help isn't on the table. And I feel like we've talked a lot about mental health and how to deal with some pretty hard topics yourselves. And in those episodes, we have very briefly touched on how it's important to reach out to a professional if you need it. But I don't think we've ever really started to discuss why reaching out to a professional is so important.
Honestly, I think you're right. I think we just kind of assume that's a given.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, so that's why we're touching on it today. So we're going to start with the case on starting young. So a brain that is still under construction is kind of our concept for this right now. The first 5 years of life are when the brain is kind of forming neural connections at a faster rate, which means this is also the period when those connections are the easiest to reshape. So we see this a lot in how younger kids learn languages really fast because, their brains are younger, they're easily molded, which is why, at a younger age, we may not want to expose children to TV as much or, bad content because their brains just are so easily moldable. So researchers call this window of heightened adaptability neuroplasticity, and it's most powerful before pruning begins in adolescence, when the brain starts cutting connections it doesn't use. And I think the idea of neuroplasticity has been something that has been heavily brought into discussion today because we still have neuroplasticity. We can still create those neural connections. It's just a little bit harder as you get older because you, have to work at it more because, like we said, the brain cuts it off if we see it as useless rather than storing that information.
Mm-hmm. And without intervention to correct those unhealthy thought patterns during this window, harmful pathways can become deeply etched into the brain's architecture as they are being used and aren't being pruned during adolescence. And this is exactly why clinicians describe early support less as what you might call extra help and more as a kind of scaffolding that shapes the structure while the structure is kind of it's still wet cement and hasn't really been built yet. Again, with that neuroplasticity.
Yeah. So studies show that interventions targeting neuroplasticity can prevent trauma from calcifying into long-term psychiatric disorders. So this would be creating any PTSD. We would be preventing that, or any kind of ACEs for kids with just adverse childhood experiences. Studies show that interventions targeting these neuroplasticities can prevent trauma from calcifying, and this can create safe, supportive relationships that help buffer children from trauma's effects by reinforcing emotional regulation circuits with safety and trust.
And this isn't exactly just helpful to kids, but also when kids are able to access that kind of emotional support from such a young age, it also introduces their parents to kind of help their children as well, not just for the children to develop those circuits, but also for their parents to help enforce those circuits in their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
so I'll say something from one famous Nobel laureate economist, James Heckman's research. It adds a practical angle on this, where he talks about how money spent on early emotional and developmental support returns far more in adult outcomes with education, employment, health, than the same investment in that emotional and developmental support made later in life.
And this again touches back on that neuroplasticity and how easily children's minds are molded when they're younger. So this is, of course, why at any given age, but especially in this age, why people are so heavy on the what you expose your kids to, the foods they eat, and all these different things, because you're molding your children and you're, strengthening them. And introducing children to the concept of emotional maturity at a young age sets them up for really being able to regulate and manage their emotions a lot better in any given social situation. So in cases where, I mean, they're still kids, so they're, learning and stuff, but in cases where kids may act out as much, if they are taught emotional regulation, they can kind of learn, I can calm myself down in this situation, and it just grows their emotional intelligence. And like Sophia said, the same investment that is made earlier in life will pay off and far more in adult outcomes. So we can move on into the immigrant paradox, which would be protecting the family by silencing the individual.
So in many immigrant households, coming from some immigrant households ourselves,
Yes.
Mental health, I mean, I don't know if you have the same experience considering your parents are psychologists, but mental health isn't seen as kind of like a private individual issue, but rather as a reflection on the whole family. And some cultural backgrounds, I think including my own, hold that mental health struggles simply shouldn't be discussed outside a tight circle of family and friends, which means the instinct to protect the family's reputation can kind of override that instinct to protect the individual. My God. And I think we'll touch more on this kind of paradox in our own lives later on in Brutal Honesty.
I will say, though, that my family has experienced it, maybe not specifically directly in my household, but both my parents have experienced that, and I have experienced that by my own grandparents and just that kind of culture, because yes, like you said, I still do come from like an immigrant family. So moving on to that, this kind of idea of the immigrant paradox creates a specific bind for children of immigrants. They're often more exposed to mainstream ideas about therapy that usually come through social media or school and peers than their parents are. But if a parent or guardian refuses to authorize mental health services, a child's options are kind of limited, no matter how willing they are to seek help. That way, it's like the immigrant kind of paradox kind of prevents any child from like accessing it or knowing that it's an option, period, because they just get shut down.
Yeah, or at least just creating a barrier between you talking and you seeking that kind of professional mental help.
Like
and
a
I feel
block.
like it's not that immigrant households don't think about mental health as something that they need to keep track of, but rather it's something that you can, like, for example, you can talk to your parents about it. You don't need to talk to someone else about your problems. I feel like that's what my father tends to say. It's that any problem that you have, you can come to me rather than talking to a stranger.
It's a trust thing, for sure.
100%.
Especially in cultures that are so heavily family-oriented. I think that's part of it, is like a lot of it's supposed to stay in the family.
And a lot of it's well-meaning.
Yes, for sure.
None of it is malicious and trying to hold a child back from the help that they need to seek.
Yeah, and again, we'll touch more on this later. So, moving off of that last topic, layered on top of the stigma are structural barriers, distrust of service systems, and cultural or linguistic differences, plus the psychological one unique to immigrant families, which would be like the sacrifice narrative.
Like we just talked about. And the data backs up how much of this costs in practice, in that, like, willingness to seek therapy in an emotional crisis runs several points lower among immigrant adults than among their U.S.-born peers, and stigma-related concerns have been shown to be a major driver of underuse of mental health services among low-income immigrant women specifically.
And I think this, like, touches on, that kind of cultural idea that I was saying. I think that I will be saying in a further episode that we've talked about, of just, like, how people view things based off of what culture they come from. And it's like we were saying earlier, like how things are very family oriented in our cultures, and just like I feel like women are very much the backbone of the family emotionally, and so
not only emotionally, but emotionally for themselves and for every other person in that family.
Yes, exactly. That's where I was going. So like I feel like for them to be seen as kind of weak in that aspect is kind of hard, because they're like, well, I'm the emotional backbone of this family.
I see what you mean.
I can't, like, be falling apart because, people come to me for that help.
And so this silence kind of backfires in that untreated struggles in childhood don't really stay small. Rather, they tend to compound over time. And so a brain that never learns to regulate that emotion doesn't just, like, toughen up over time, but it often gets recruited into coping strategies that creates new problem, like avoidance, other complaints, and conflict at home. I mean, you see people kind of turn in towards themselves and aren't able to talk later on. I feel like that's where a lot of that, like, macho man energy comes from,
yeah.
where I don't need to talk, I can take it all myself.
And I think that also comes from, again, like we were saying, social media. Like, just as we were saying, peers and children can get their ideas of what mental health and mental health treatment looks like off of social media and school and other people. Also, the mentality of how to deal with things, like culturally and just socially, that macho man mentality can be fostered. But also, like I was saying earlier, if you don't teach your children about forms of emotional intelligence or how to process things, you know, they can turn inwards and kind of just rely on themselves rather than kind of seeking help they may need. And this is not to discount anyone who doesn't feel as if they need to talk about their problems, because I know a lot of people who are okay with dealing with their issues and processing on their own, but that is because they have a form of processing and they can, versus kids who don't really understand emotional processing at all and just turn inwards and kind of internalize all that emotion for it to kind of just fester negatively inside their mind, which creates negative headspace, which is just bad.
Yeah, and that also brings us to the fact that stigma is intergenerational by design, in a way that, like, a child raised to believe that emotional struggle must be hidden usually grows into a parent who models that exact same silence, which is part of why researchers tend to frame stigma reduction as a multi-generational community-level project, you know, rather than an individual one.
And this, like, goes into that quote, like, breaking the cycle that we see everywhere, like, oh, I'm going to break the cycle. Because I think nowadays we're better at recognizing when there is a pattern of turning inwards or a lack of emotional intelligence or a lack of getting help, and recognizing mental disorders or, you know, emotional struggles. And it's recognized that it doesn't just start with one person, but it is passed down, because, you know, my family has experienced it, and we see how the way my grandparents have grown up has affected my mom, which has affected me, which will probably affect my kids. And again, that's why getting help is so important, because it allows you to recognize these patterns and kind of work to break out of them so that you don't continue that cycle.
Absolutely.
Which perfectly moves into our next bullet point of building a toolkit when professional help isn't an option. So the good news is, backed by real evidence too, is therapy isn't an all or nothing resource, which is perfect because, you know, a lot of people don't have access to therapy, which I just think is sad, because I feel like mental health is such an underrated field where people really should be able to access it even if they can't.
And multiple studies show that self-directed cognitive behavioral therapy, which that's a lot in and of itself, through structured self-help books or internet-based programs, can be genuinely effective for anxiety and depression, and people who learn these CBT skills on their own tend to hold on to their progress over time. And we'll go a little bit more into that in our next episode, actually.
Yes.
But the main thing to focus on is that these have to be structured, self-help, self-skilled programs, books, stuff like that.
It's just like learning anything else, honestly. Like, and my parents always say that when they're talking about how they teach their clients about meditation and all that. Like, the work isn't just done in therapy, which is why therapy isn't necessarily, that's just not always the end answer or the only solution to an equation, because there's always personal effort that needs to go in, and you can also make that effort on your own, especially if you don't have access to it. You just, you know, should make sure that your sources of information are, you know, good. So I feel like it's just like learning anything, that it takes practice, it takes time, and it takes commitment, but that's important in anything.
And one of these skills that we can use is journaling, which you've actually talked about a lot. But the important thing to mention is that freeform journaling alone rarely produces that lasting change. And this is because writing feelings without really examining the thinking behind them kind of just replays the distress. And a structured thought record where you write down the triggering situation, the automatic thought, and an alternative perspective kind of forces you to treat your own conclusions as testable rather than as fact.
And this kind of pushes that keyword of structure. And I think like Sophia said, we've talked a lot about journaling. And I think we've talked about how to journal as well, and that journaling allows you to process. But I don't think we've touched upon how it helps you process. So like she was saying, like, by writing down those feelings, you also need to kind of take the time to analyze them and see where you're going. And that doesn't mean like write everything down and then reread it, although for some people it may. As you write, sometimes you may gain some clarity about the situation. Like, I know that's how it works for me. As I write things or I talk things out, I'm like, wow, wait, okay, I hear it now, or I see it now. Mm-hmm. And that's me actively analyzing as I'm journaling. So as long as you're not just kind of like spilling all the information and kind of ignoring it without really trying to think about it or see it from a different perspective, it doesn't really work unless you do those. Right. So moving into how guided self-help, even guided informally by a supportive but non-clinical person, like I was saying, talking to your friends, mm-hmm. Even has research support across depression, anxiety, eating difficulties, and chronic pain. So go ahead.
Sorry. This means that peer support, a trusted mentor, or even like a school counselor can meaningfully substitute for a licensed therapist in many cases. I mean, that doesn't mean that they can replace one, but it does meaningfully help. And I feel like especially mentioning the school counselor part, mm-hmm. where a lot of people have school counselors at their school, and that's probably the time that you wouldn't be able to access professional help if, for example, your parents couldn't mm-hmm. let you have one.
And I think we've said this in previous episodes that our school counselors are really an underused resource, at least from what I've seen. And they have a lot of tools to help you. And they can set you up with a school psychologist. Mm-hmm. Like, there are school psychologists, and your school most likely has one. So if you feel you do need that professional help or that professional insight, you probably can I've heard my own friends talk about how some of their siblings or other people have set up, appointments with their school psychologist, and it helps a lot.
Absolutely. And the only thing to mention is that self-help does have real limits.
Yes.
And that exposure exercises, for example, done incorrectly, can worsen anxiety, and unstructured cognitive work can tip into a kind of rumination instead of relief. And so the honest message isn't you don't need therapy. It really is just that there is real evidence-based ground between doing nothing and seeing a therapist weekly. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of stuff you can do in between that.
Yeah. And I think, like I was saying, this all touches on why having a therapist is important. And the one thing that I say always is, I feel as if everyone should see a therapist.
I wholeheartedly agree.
I don't think everyone needs to see a therapist per se, but I think everyone could benefit from having a therapist or a psychologist or someone, because it helps to be able to see how to process things, even from someone such as myself who feels I'm more emotionally intelligent than some of my peers based on my upbringing in a mental health household. I still find the benefits of therapy because, they are trained for this job to kind of I don't want to say reform thinking, but kind of help your thinking, I guess, be reformed to be maybe more positive.
Or at least reframed.
Yes, reframed, that's better. To kind of think in a more positive light or in a better direction for your life, rather than you getting stuck in ruminating cycles like Sophia said. And I think it's really important to kind of know the limits of self-help, because that's why I ultimately rely on journaling and just a lot of introspective thinking, because if you take the steps to kind of analyze yourself and situations, you can kind of gain clarity as long as you try to do it from a I want to better myself point, which I think is really big. So you have to have you have to have a set mindset that's
Absolutely.
Good for this situation in order to get anywhere. Because of course, like Sophia said, you don't want to worsen anything. So I feel like the main takeaway would be, like I was saying, therapy is important. Mm-hmm. And there are real benefits to it, whether or not you may need to see one. It's always an option that's out there, even if you just need to process. But if you don't have access to a therapist, there are self-help techniques that you can use, like journaling and just anything that you can find online that can help, but you want to be aware of limits. And there is a stigma, especially in immigrant families, but even just in society today, that it's sometimes not okay to talk about things or to keep it within a certain circle. But I feel like we really need to break out of that and just understand that going to therapy doesn't mean you're crazy. And I think that's a huge thing that might be it. It's like, oh, well, if you go to therapy, you're crazy. Just because you go to therapy doesn't mean you're crazy.
And that stigma is slowly breaking down over time.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing is that you don't even have to be hurting to go to therapy.
Yeah, for sure.
A normal, everyday, regular Joe can go to therapy just to talk about his day, and that's good enough.
Because it gives that outside perspective, which
Absolutely.
I think is hugely important in any scenario. Just be like going to a friend.
Yeah. So that pretty much wraps up our tea journal for this week. Welcome back to Infusing Insight.
So basically, Infusing Insight is where we choose a topic to debate, not necessarily to, quote, crown a winner, but to look at the pros and cons of the subject.
Today, we'll be focusing specifically on commonly brought up cons of therapy and our takes on them.
I'm excited for this one, honestly.
Me too.
So the first one here is it's too expensive or it's not worth the cost.
And so the specific con that we have for this is that even with insurance, copays add up and many good therapists are out of network. For a lot of families, cost is the single biggest wall between them and care.
So, however, there is a refute for this, and I feel like although cost is real, it's not a dead end, and a lot of therapists can offer sliding scale fees, and there are a lot of community mental health centers that exist specifically just to bridge this gap of like a cost struggle. Online therapy has also been shown in studies to be just as effective as in-person sessions for many, many concerns, which widens the pool of affordable options considerably. I know there are a lot of really affordable options, like BetterHelp is one of them, and they make sure that a lot of these therapists on there are qualified. And I know my mom specifically, like, sometimes, like, if there's someone who really needs help or they may not, like, her client may not always be able to pay the full or whatever, she sometimes slides her fees or like will change them up based on the person and what they're able to do, because, you know, the biggest thing is help is needed and help matters. And the cost is not like, for a lot of therapists, I hope, and from what I've seen from my parents, the cost is not the important part to them. The money is not the important part, although of course money is important. They want to be able to help people.
And the actual survey data backs up why this myth persists rather than why it's true. And so in a 2022 Kaiser Family Foundation / CNN survey found that stigma and shame were cited as a barrier, second only to cost and insurance being the first. Meaning that cost is a real obstacle, but it's routinely tangled up with shame in ways that makes it feel a lot bigger than it actually is.
And I feel like cost can be used a lot as a mask for the real insecurities, like you were saying, that it's like routinely tangled up with the stigma and like the shame that going to therapy is. And I feel like what we really want to do in this episode is take away that shame of going to therapy, because there isn't. Like, it is. Like, it's like going to a friend and talking about your issues, except this is a more qualified friend who went to school and understands how the brain works, so they can better help you and more effectively, you know, give you more effective advice.
And this actually brings us right into our next one, where
I'm so good at segues.
Exactly, where it's just talking. It doesn't actually fix anything. And so our con here is that sitting in a room describing your problems out loud can feel like venting with extra steps, not treatment.
And I want to add my own twist to this, because this is something that my parents hear a lot that also kind of makes me mad, is that it's just talking like anyone can do it. And it's like, so no, not anyone can do it, because my parents went to school for this for like how many years? Like, I think, and they have to, like, specifically for like doctoral candidates, they have to write a whole dissertation. They have to do all this research and all this. So, like, these people are very heavily trained.
And educated.
And, yes, very heavily trained and educated in mental health and in the brain. And I feel like we need to focus on the fact that it's the brain. Because I feel like if people hear, oh, they're heavily educated in the brain, it makes it sound so much smarter and like, oh, like this is like an actual job, and like, oh, they're so educated in emotions. Like, anyone's educated in emotions. I have them. Like, it's just so like, you know what I mean? So go ahead.
Thank you. Modern therapy, like you were saying, involves far more than just talking.
Yeah.
And many approaches use evidence-based techniques specifically designed to address the root of a problem, change those unhelpful behaviors, and build those durable coping skills, with CBT alone, cognitive behavioral therapy, being one of the most extensively researched forms of psychotherapy that exists.
And I feel like this is, if you were to like research therapy, or not, I don't want to keep using the word therapy specifically, but like a psychologist or psychology in general and how it operates, there are so many different facets of our understanding of brain processing. And I want to stress the brain processing, because therapy isn't just emotional processing all the time. It's really breaking down how your brain is processing something, which plays into, of course, our emotions, but like there are literal chemical things within our brain that can change how we react to things. And psychology goes into like how our brain will ignore certain things. Like we learned in psych class that just this year that like our brain will omit information from our brain. Like it's like, you know, when you're like reading a sentence and you just skip a word, or you read the word even if it's correctly, even if it's spelled wrong, is because your brain fills in those gaps, and your brain does all these crazy things that we just don't even realize it does. And these psychologists and therapists and mental health experts are experts in how the brain does this and fills in those gaps or changes how we view things or can distort our realities, which is again why it's so important to not just discount and say it's just talking, because it's not. They really understand how your emotional processing is affected by your brain's processing of information and all of those effects. Go ahead.
Sorry. I'm just going to bring some data into this real quick.
Yes.
In that the average person who receives psychotherapy ends up better off than 79% of people who don't seek treatment at all. And so this isn't just like a vague sense of, oh, therapy is just going to make you feel better, but it's an actual measurable clinical effect.
Mm-hmm. And I can just speak from my own experience, and Sophia can actually speak from my experience too, because all of my friends saw me, like I've talked a lot about my breakup and how that really distorted my reality and my brain, and my parents saw it, my friends saw it, I don't think my teacher saw it as much, but like the people in my life saw it. And I went to therapy and I talked about it in therapy, and I told my mom the other day, like, and I could go into this later, but like, wow, I was like, I didn't even realize how much my processing changed. And my mom was like, well, we're trained to do that. And I was like, yeah, and it really did just feel like she was just talking to me. And it was crazy. And Sophia can even see how my mind has cleared, and it isn't just like a sense of relief, but it's just like my perception and my outlook on life has drastically grown. And I use the word change sparingly, because I know a lot of people are really afraid of the word change, because they're like, oh, I don't want to be changed or whatever. Like, yeah. And it's like, therapy's not going to change you. It's just going to grow you into a better person and educate you. So that moves into our next one, that therapy just pushes medication on you.
And so there's a fear that walking into a therapist's office is a one-way door toward being prescribed something you didn't really want.
And I feel like that's not true. Like, medication, just specifically from what I've seen from even my parents, medication is not, and I want to stress not, always the option or the route you want to go.
Usually it's the end case scenario.
It's definitely, because medication is usually when something is like severe.
Yeah. And also, this conflates two different professions. Talk therapy itself has been shown to be as effective as medication for treating depression, and in some cases more effective at preventing relapse. Because, and like we've said, therapy teaches skills that keep working long after sessions end. Whereas medication prescribing is handled by psychiatrists or prescribing physicians, not by most therapists or counselors at all.
Mm-hmm. Actually, therapists now they can obtain a certification to prescribe, but originally they couldn't prescribe medication at all. You would have to go see the psychologists, and therapists would have to refer you to a psychiatrist, like Sophia said, to get medication. And I feel like medication isn't as I mean, I'm not saying it's not effective, but it might not be, because you can actively choose to stop taking your meds.
It's also not the only thing you're doing. When you're on medication, you are not just taking the medication and you're A-okay after that. I just take my antidepressants and I'm perfectly fine now.
No, you still gotta learn those skills.
Yeah, it pairs with talk therapy and working through what's going on.
Which is, again, like Sophia and I said, why psychologists will refer you to a psychiatrist for medication, but that doesn't mean they necessarily stop working with you. Because if the medication could just fix everything, then I feel like a psychologist either wouldn't have a job, or they could have just prescribed medication from the beginning.
Yeah.
So I feel like I think that was kind of like our refute in terms of, that. So our next point is, my therapist won't understand my culture or background.
And especially for immigrant families or people from these tight-knit cultural communities, there's a real fear of sitting across from someone who will misread your own cultural context as pathology or push a worldview that feels foreign to your values. And in our personal opinion, and also in real life, this concern was legitimate enough that it's actually shaped the field, in that researchers have increasingly point towards enhanced cultural training as the mechanism that lets mental health professionals understand how different communities conceptualize mental health, including the meaning of specific symptoms and help-seeking behaviors. And the practical version of this refute is simply that you're allowed to shop for fit.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. I was like, you don't have to just get one therapist and say, okay, that's it. Like, you're allowed to say, I'm not really connecting with this It's just like friends. Like, if you don't connect with a friend, you don't have to be friends with them.
And there are so many therapists out there now, thank God, that you can find one from your culture.
Yes. And a lot of them specialize, like, I know, like, my dad will say this isn't, like, quote, culture, but, like, he has up on his website, like, oh, I specialize, or I really love working with clients who are very interested in the music field and, like, arts, or, like, other stuff like that. My mom works with specific cases, and she, like, works with people with disabilities because she can connect to that culture, or Asian culture. And she said she's had a lot of clients that come to her that are, Filipino because she's Filipino, or Asian because she's Asian.
Exactly. And it's the same as looking for friends. You don't become friends with every single person you meet, and you're not going to click with every single therapist.
Oh, for sure. So it's like, it's really like, it's like shopping. It's like you can find someone who fits for you, and that's why they have bios up, because like, otherwise it'd just be like, yeah, here's your therapist, you don't need to know anything about me.
And this kind of like flows a little bit into our next con, which is like, I tried it once and it didn't help, and the con comes with a bad first experience with a therapist that maybe felt cold, or a modality that didn't really click. And this can kind of feel like a kind of proof that therapy in general might not be for you.
And that, like, I can give, like, an outside example. Like, if you may not like a food the first time. God, when I was little, I tried salmon for the first time, and I hated it. And I was like, and some people can choose, like, oh, I hated it the first time I tried it, so I'm never eating it again. But I was like, no, like, salmon's probably really good, and I just had a bad experience, or I didn't like how it was cooked that time, because it was smoked that time.
And it's the same with therapists.
Like, just because you didn't like this one person doesn't mean you're not gonna like the next one. Like, I feel like there's so many, like, extra, like, other types of examples for this, and outside of just therapy, that it's just like, okay, so you can try it a second time with that, but you don't think you can try therapy again? Because every therapist has a different approach to how they go about treatment.
You don't have to find the perfect therapist right away. And I think it's normal and expected to try a few before finding that kind of like right fit.
Yeah.
Since the therapeutic relationship itself is central to which treatment works. And one mismatch is more or less data about that one therapist or the therapist's approach, and not a verdict on the entire field.
And I feel like you could give, like, an example of, like, if you and your friend were out together and your friend's like in a terrible mood and you see your other friend that doesn't know, like, okay, say I'm out with Sophia and Sophia's in a horrible mood because I dragged her out and it's raining and she's like, ugh, I don't want to be here, and she's in a terrible mood. And then I see my other friend that Sophia's never met before and I'm like, oh my God, hi. And then I introduce them and Sophia's just kind of like, ugh, hi, like, yeah, it's nice to meet you. And they'd be like, oh my God, like, she's a terrible person. I'd be like, no, you just got the wrong first impression of her, or you didn't kind of see how she was on a daily basis. You just, didn't see it. You only saw it once and it didn't, quote, work for you.
Mm-hmm.
So then if you try it again, or if you, like, quote, meet Sophia again and you're like, wait, she's really nice. She was just in a bad mood that day. It's like the same thing with a therapist. Like, okay, that one wasn't right, but like, hey, maybe there's a better one out there. Like,
absolutely.
I don't know, like, that one specifically, I feel like makes me kind of mad, because it's just like, but you would try it again for something else.
Yeah.
Like, if you hated one rock climbing experience, but you'll go again because rock climbing seems fun. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And just some caveats that we're going to say before the end of this segment is that not every criticism of therapy is a myth to be debunked. And some legitimate critiques point out that evidence-based treatments don't automatically guarantee good outcomes for every individual, and that which treatments get labeled evidence-based is partially shaped by which studies get funded in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Therapy is well supported, but it is not a guarantee, and skepticism about which approach or which therapist isn't the same thing as skepticism about whether help is worth seeking at all.
Yeah.
And we're not here to pretend that therapy is perfect or that every barrier to it is just like a myth in disguise. Evidence-based treatments can be genuinely effective, but they don't automatically guarantee a good outcome for every single person. And stigma also isn't the only real obstacle. Costs, waitlists, and provider shortages are documented systematic problems, not excuses. Debunking the myths doesn't mean debunking the difficulty.
That's like low-key a bar right there. I'm not even gonna lie.
Sometimes the barrier is real, and the honest move is just naming that instead of pretending it's not there and working towards getting that help for yourself.
Yeah, and I feel like that goes with so much. It's just like, not everything is always going to work. And like in any profession, there are going to be people who aren't good at their job. And you may end up like going to see the person who isn't necessarily good at your job. Mm-hmm. But like we were saying before, that's not a reflection on the whole field. You would go see a medical doctor, but if they were mean, you're not going to just stop going to doctors
if
because
your heart is racing and you're like, you have shortness of breath and your one cardiologist is just being rude to you the entire time, you're going to see another cardiologist. You're not
because you want to get the help that you need.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing for therapy. However, I feel like it's so easily written off because a lot of the times we can just say, well, it's all in my head. Mm-hmm. And I can fix it anyway because it's all kind of about that. But, even if it's not, it's still, I feel like, worth noting that you can, like, getting the help you need is important. Absolutely. And it'll help you a lot. And I feel like that's the main takeaway is regardless of all the stigma and the cons that are out there, not every therapist might be the one for you, and you can find someone else. And even if you feel like it's just, they're not going to understand your culture, find somebody else, or maybe they will. You just kind of have to look and be open. And so I think that's my biggest message right now is be open to it.
And that actually pretty much wraps up our infusing insight.
Welcome back to Brutal Honesty.
To recap, Brutal Honesty is where we'll go through our personal stories and anecdotes to supplement what we've talked about already.
We'll also discuss deeper topics within the episode.
For today, we'll be discussing our personal takes on the stigma around seeking therapy and the importance of seeking therapy in our own lives.
Yes. So, I'll start because, low-key, I was the one who came up with this idea.
Also, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Mind the sounds outside because we're recording in the car.
Yeah, but we're also sitting in a parking lot because we're picking up my brother. And it's hot out, so we put the windows down. And if you hear thunder, it's okay. So, anyways, back on
little segue.
Back on topic. Hold on. Pause for me and Sophia to get a little comfy. I'm gonna recline my chair a bit and scoot it back a bit. Okay. Anyways.
Cutesy. What? Oh, sorry.
It's my bad. So,
Why don't you start?
yeah, I'll
Because this
start.
was your idea
Yeah.
and everything.
So, I was kind of thinking the other day about... Ooh, I like that. Sorry. Sophia opened the moonroof.
The skylight?
Ooh, moonroof.
Moonroof?
Sorry. Tangential. Anyway, so me and Sophia kind of have talked a lot about, you know, the stigma about mental health and going to therapy and all of that in our families. And I thought about it the other day because one of the things that my grandparents often say to me, well, I'll preface this with the fact that I go to therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So I actively go to therapy. There's nothing, quote, wrong with me. Like, I've had my struggles with depression. I, of course, have anxiety and stress problems like everybody else. But I'll preface this with, like, I'm not, like, I don't need medication. I don't need to be hospitalized. Nothing like that. And I guess by some people's definition, you wouldn't call me crazy.
Sure.
But...
I would. No, I'm kidding.
Alright, anyways. But
Just kidding.
I still regularly go to therapy. In fact, I've gone back to going to therapy every other week. Because I just feel like I needed more help with, like, time management and planning things out, managing my focus, which goes into another thing that therapy can help for. It's not just about emotions. It can also help you plan your time better and manage, like, ADHD tendencies where you know, lose focus or you can't, like, keep track of yourself. So... what brought me into this was every time I seem to tell my grandparents that I have, like, a therapy session or, oh, I'm busy, I'm sorry, like, I have therapy, they're like, why are you in therapy? You're not crazy. Like, why are you in therapy? Like, you don't need therapy. And I'm always sitting there like, well, you know, like, it helps me process my thoughts or helps me kind of declutter the mess in my mind that is created by just, like, you know, the everyday of life. And it also helps me with, like, time management, and I'm stressed because of, you know, college apps, so it's nice to talk through that with somebody, even if I don't necessarily need to.
And coming from the other side of this, I wouldn't say my parents, but specifically my father tends to be a little bit, he doesn't really like the idea of therapy as a whole. Not that talking isn't a bad thing. He repeatedly tells me, like, oh, if you need to talk, I'm here for you.
Right.
It was never about the fact that I couldn't talk about my mental health or that my mental health wasn't important. I mean, he knows I'm doing all this. Mm-hmm. He knows I personally want to do talk therapy in my future.
Right.
As the therapist, of course, but also in my future I see myself going to therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But while I don't have the chance to, I personally have done research into self-help myself. And this podcast was kind of a part of my journey in discovering how to help myself mentally while also helping other people. Mm-hmm. And the stigma in my household was never, again, it was, I touched on this earlier, it was never, you shouldn't talk about your mental health.
Right.
But rather, why would you need to talk to someone else when I'm right here to talk with you for you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't need someone else when I'm here. But the most important thing to think about in my head is that, like, you can't talk to your parents about your parents.
Yeah. And I think, and that was, you know, I think it was a struggle even for my parents as mental health professionals when I first told them, hey, I want therapy. Mm-hmm. Because I don't want to label their feelings, of course, but I feel like, in a sense, it was like, where did we go wrong? Because we gave her all the opportunities to talk about her feelings.
100%.
Especially with how I used to, like, hurt myself and all the stuff like that. They were like, where did we go wrong? And it was like, one of the things that I told them was like, it's nice to have a therapist because I feel like hearing the same things, even just from a parent, the perception that I get is kind of like it's from the parental aspect, and sometimes it's easier to hear it from someone that isn't your parent.
Absolutely. And when you said that thing about the fact that, like, where did we go wrong, I feel like the same thing happened with me in that, like, well, I used to self-harm, and I don't anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And my aunt's a therapist, and so I was able to get that kind of outside perspective from her in a way. Of course, it's not the end of it, and of course I would like to seek therapy in the future, but the problem is that it doesn't necessarily mean that your parents went wrong when you need therapy.
Yeah,
it's more or less that, like,
course.
you just want another perspective, and you need someone who's educated and who knows what they're talking about to talk to you.
Yeah. And to touch on Sophia's point about, like, you can't talk to your parents about your parents, like, she's right. Like, I can go to therapy, and if I'm really irritated with something my parents have done, or I don't like a choice they've made with their parenting, like, I might not necessarily agree with how they're handling something, whether it's with me or with my brother, I can go talk to my therapist about it, and I know that she'll actively work to hear my side because, one, it's her job, and two, you know, she's there to help me, and then she can help me see my parents' point, because I, myself, whether or not I disagree with my parents, I always try to see their point, and I'll bring that into my therapy session, but, you know, when your parents are telling you that, you're more resistant to hearing it, especially if you're annoyed by them, so you're like, ugh, like, I don't need to know this, like, whatever, or not even, I don't need to know this, but, like, I don't really, like, it's just, you don't receive it as well.
Yeah.
But if my therapist were to tell me, it's just like, okay, so now I have an outside perspective. It's not just my parents because they're my parents and this is what they think is right. It's like I'm getting an outside perspective that also thinks, hey, maybe you should listen to them, or they have a point, or, like, try to find this sort of compromise, which is, again, another reason why I love going to therapy. It just unblocks that, like, it helps me see the other perspective better, even if I can sort of see it myself.
And that's not to say that you can't talk to your parents about your problems.
Oh, for sure.
Your parents are they should be the first people that you go to when you have a problem. And, of course, you should be able to tell your parents when you're frustrated with them in a way. But, of course, not only might you not be able to say that well enough, but also they might not receive it well because of the way you're saying it. And therapy can help you not only think about your feelings, but also help you with what to say to other people when you want to have hard conversations.
Yes. And therapy really is that safe space that everybody says it is. Again, when you find that good therapist. Because I'll say one of the biggest struggles between me and my parents is my tone. Because I feel like the adolescent teenage tone as a whole has always been an issue, no matter what age I want to say it was. But I feel like even now, like, just specifically with, like, how I talk around my friends, like, my tone is, it's respectable for my friends. Like, no one has an issue with how I talk, but when I come home, and this has to do sometimes culturally, too, which I feel like Sophia is, like,
I'm, like,
looking at me like, oh, cultural.
No, I'm thinking the exact same thing.
Right.
It's, the tone thing is, like, I can talk to my friends in any which way, and they will not think that I'm upset with them because of my tone.
But not even upset, like, think I'm being disrespectful.
Yes.
Or whatever. And sometimes
you're right, it's
even
a cultural thing.
Yes. And sometimes even my teachers. Because, like, if I got really close with my English teacher this past year, and she has a daughter that's my age, and, like, she understands it, and she's, like, she was a phenomenal teacher, but she also understood how we talk, so we were more lax around her. Like, I don't ever go to school to speak disrespectfully, and the way I speak to my teachers is drastically different than how I speak to my friends.
Same
even
with
though,
parents.
yes, and even my parents, regardless of the fact that I get more comfortable with some teachers than others. But going to therapy, I have the comfort of knowing that I can just talk freely and I don't have to get yelled at for my tone when I'm venting or I'm expressing my thoughts, because she's not necessarily there to parent me, but she's there to kind of help guide me and help me see another perspective. And so she may say, like, hey, so that tone right there might be what your parents might be reacting to, and while you may think it might not be disrespectful, they might see it as this because your voice may sound like this, or maybe try talking like this. And I think one of the things that I was saying is, like, well, I think I talk like this to my parents because I'm so comfortable at home that it's like I talk the same way I talk to my friends, but it's received differently. But it's very hard for me to change out of that without me feeling inauthentic.
Right. And I feel like another thing with your parents is that they want to find a solution for you. If you're having a problem, they want to help you.
Because that's their job.
Exactly. The only problem with that is if you want to vent and they keep giving you solutions, it doesn't feel like they're hearing you out.
Yes. And I feel like the way they present solutions, and I feel like this is a little tangential, but it's okay. The way they present solutions or present certain things may seem as if they're trying to give you a solution. Like, I'm thinking specifically with, like, my brother. Like, that happened the one time where it was like, you're just giving me solutions, you're not helping me. And I was, like, listening to it, and I was like, so no, they actually are helping you. and they're giving you the steps, but the steps also sound like solutions. So it's like, and I'm realizing, like, wow, from an outside perspective, you can tell, like, oh, it may not be what I'm perceiving it to be when I'm actively irritated. And that's what, like, my therapist helps me see when it's not me sitting in that outside perspective, which is so helpful. But, like, I kind of want to go back to, like, our grandparents, how I was saying, like, you're not crazy, why are you in therapy? And I feel like there is a cultural stigma, especially within Asian cultures, that is, like,
if you aren't crazy, you don't need to talk to someone outside of your family.
Because it's just, like, why would you ever talk to anyone else about your problems?
Or, like, why would I pay someone to hear your problems when I can just hear your problems?
Or why would you be vulnerable to a stranger? That's a huge one.
Yes.
Even if that's not, like, just a cultural thing, excuse me. I feel like that's, like, the huge roadblock with a lot of people is, why would I be vulnerable to a stranger? And, like, I think me and Sophia have talked a lot about vulnerability on this podcast and how being, I don't want to say, like, unwilling, but, like, feeling like you don't want to, like, you're unwilling to be any sort of, like, show any sort of vulnerability in anything is where it's, like, you can kind of, I don't want to say screw yourself over, but it can get harder to, like, get better with things or to see a different perspective. And it's, like, when you're with a therapist, like, just know, number one, they can't go tell people.
Yeah.
It's literally, like, they will get...
violation.
It's a HIPAA violation.
And HIPAA is, like, a protection of your rights as a person.
Yes.
And the only way that someone could ever get that is through a subpoena, which is through court, which at that point...
And that's usually, like, if there's, like, a crime or, like, someone did, like, and it's like, oh, no, you have to tell us.
Yeah.
But, like...
But otherwise, they are legally required not to tell anyone.
Like, you can't say, they can't say anything. It's totally confidential.
Absolutely. And even if, like, I've heard other therapists where they talk about the fact that they can see their clients in stores and they completely pretend like they don't know them at all.
Oh, my parents, I have personal experience with this because, like, we will be out as a family and my parents will see their clients, and not that they're necessarily trying to avoid them, but we can't be around.
Yeah.
And now if I say, like, I meet the client or they want to meet me as a person and my mom's okay with that, that's different. But, like, my mom cannot introduce me to the client. Yeah. The client can say, oh, introduce me to your daughter. And then they will, because I've met some of my mom's clients because of that, because they've asked to be introduced to me and stuff like that. But they have to keep their family life separate, which is another reason why, and I don't know if, like, they've talked about this before, like, if this is, like, a known thing, but, like, therapists can't see friends. Like, my parents cannot provide services to friends or family or people they know because it's a conflict of interest.
Exactly.
Because if they say something that someone may not like,
it can ruin the
relationship. And just, like, confidentiality purposes.
And the point of having a therapist is to be able to tell your problems to an outside perspective that isn't going to judge you for what you're doing.
Yes.
Whereas if you're going to see a friend for therapy or you're going to talk to your parents about something and you tell them something, they could possibly see you in a different light because of that, and you can't control that anymore.
And I feel like that touches on, like, to, like, the vulnerability aspect that I was talking about, because I'm like, it's, like, in therapy, it's okay to be vulnerable and you need to be vulnerable, and it's, like, it's scary trusting a stranger, but it's, like, it's scary trusting any person you've met ever. Like, that's how anybody forms relationships.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to give some form of trust, or you're not going to ever form connections, period, in life. And that's so important, because being willing to be vulnerable in general is, like, again, like I said, it's major in anything. So, like, I don't see why it could be scary when going to a therapist, although I do understand it. But for me personally, I don't. But I know for my dad, because we were saying, like, I don't know if Sophia said, I don't know if Sophia has experienced this, but I know my dad growing up, they didn't talk about feelings. Like, he says that.
Yeah.
It's like, my family did, and he, not to, like, shame anything or label it as one culture, but he grew up in a white family. He is white. And they didn't talk about their feelings. And I feel like that's also not only a cultural thing, but a generational thing. of whether or not they want to talk about their feelings. And it's just kind of like don't show weakness too.
Exactly. And we talked about how not talking about your feelings can be a multi-generational issue, and that's why so many different people talk about breaking the cycle of not talking, not sharing feelings, and, you know, changing what's going on and being able to talk about it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be vulnerable to literally everybody. The most important thing is being authentic, obviously.
Which I think, again, is the perk of therapy, because you're not being vulnerable to everyone. You can actually just be vulnerable to just this one person, know that it literally cannot legally go anywhere, and that they actually have your best interests at heart, because it's their job and you're paying them to do so.
Just as you would see a doctor and expect that they would want you to be better, a therapist also wants you to be better. Mm-hmm. And your relationship with your therapist is based mainly on you and not the therapist.
Yeah, and I feel like it's the one moment that your life gets to be all about you.
Exactly, and you don't have to be guilty about overtaking a conversation all about yourself, because that's the point of what's going on.
Yeah, and I feel like as human beings, we always want to better ourselves. Like, that's just our natural kind of order, I kind of want to call it. Like, that's just our natural way of going about things, and that's so majorly important. And therapy can help you do that. Like I was saying earlier, you may not need therapy, but it's always good because you can kind of see, like, wow, like, this can show me how I can be a better person.
Absolutely.
And be a better friend, be a better husband, wife, partner, whatever. Like, and it just helps you better yourself, and it helps you clear your mind. Like, even if you just, like my mom will go to therapy too, and it just helps her declutter her mind and her space and process things that have happened in the month or however long it's been since she's been to therapy. And it's the same with me. And I feel like that's why it's so huge immigration households to kind of understand that, like, while I may not seem crazy, it doesn't necessarily mean I don't benefit from therapy.
I've heard people say that the people that go to therapy, the people who need therapy but don't go put other people in therapy. In that,
oh my god, yes. I actually am, like, legitimately gonna agree with that.
Everybody needs therapy. And the people
I don't say needs, should go. That's why I say should go.
I say needs.
Really?
Because I feel like everyone needs to be able to process their emotions.
Yeah.
And so even...
That's fair.
And I'm not saying needs to go to a therapist, but I'm saying needs therapy in general.
Oh, like needs a therapeutical assistance
yes,
in their life.
Needs to be able to work on themselves, needs to be able to process their emotions, regulate their behaviors.
That is so important, and I will say that too, because, like, if you did not learn that, because, again, like Sophia was saying, generationally, like, those are things sometimes that are not taught. Like, emotional intelligence sometimes is not taught in a household because it's just not what it is. Like, learning how to understand other people's emotions or why they might do things. Like, the amount of, I don't want to say help, but, like, my emotional intelligence and the way it has shaped how I view life and how I move through life is so drastic compared to other people, because, like, it's like that, like, when you hear someone, like, getting bullied or someone who's mean, they're like, well, you may not know what's going on in their life. Like, it's literally that.
Yeah.
But, like, you can see it from a more active perspective, where you can be like, I feel like they may be reacting because of something like this, and you move through life more empathetically.
Absolutely agree.
And it helps you. And, like, I just feel like, in general, that your idea of you saying, like, people who need therapy who don't go put other people in therapy is so true, because that can put such a harsh mental effect on other people.
It's the same as the phrase hurt people, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And that goes, like, in anything, because it's just, like, we all affect each other's lives, whether it's someone you pass by on the street or someone you've known for 10 years. Every little encounter affects your life.
Yeah.
And while it's a beautiful thought, it's also daunting, because it's just like, wow, I can't imagine how my life would have been slightly different had I not met this like, I'll give a perspective. Like, I met a girl at the ice rink, like, a month or so ago. And, like, it was literally a 5-minute encounter, but had I not had that 5-minute encounter, like, the past month of my life would have been so drastically different.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, amazingly different, just because I took the initiative to go talk to this girl because I thought she was cool. And it's, like, I agree, like, I feel like everybody does need some like, therapy.
And that's what I'm saying. Not everyone needs to see a therapist, but everyone needs therapy.
Yeah, because it's so important to learn how to emotionally regulate. Like, you can tell, like, when people don't, because it affects your life and it affects the other people in your life.
Yeah. You being able to regulate your emotions and regulate
understand
your behaviors
them.
And understand them. Whoa, that was a big bolt of lightning. Affects your entire surroundings. It affects everyone you interact with.
Yeah. And it's just, like, I feel like it's so important because it just allows us to be better people and to understand people better, which allows us to be better in careers and school and life and in general. Like, it's huge.
Absolutely.
To be able to, like, understand like, I feel like that's, like, a superpower. To be able to understand, regulate, and break down emotional reactions is, like, I don't even know.
It's an important skill to have.
Yes.
It's an important tool to put in your toolbox.
Oh, wow.
I know.
So, I mean, I feel like
this...
Yeah, so, like, wrapping up, like, I feel like all of this shows why we think therapy is important, regardless of stigma of, like, oh, don't be vulnerable, or, oh, you're not crazy, or, oh, you could just talk to me.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but everyone can benefit from therapy. It can give you tools just to better yourself or give a different perspective.
Again, whether that be talking to a therapist or trying to seek your own help.
Yeah. Even if that's like a friend, journaling, coloring, singing.
Self-help book.
Online,
book. Cognitive behavioral therapy programs.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
That's the end of Brutal Honesty. Thank you so much for listening to this episode.
I hope you'll join us next week on
Sip and Spill.